I am Dr. Steve Johnson. I want to welcome you to something I'm really quite excited about, and that is interviewing a good friend and colleague, Dr. David Olshine. Dr. Olshine has written this fantastic book that I was able to take a look at this weekend, and actually I'm going to go back and even read it in more depth. It's a shorter book, but it is jam-packed with some really good stuff. The title is The Mystery of Silence, Making Sense of Life When God Seems Absent. So, Dr. Olshine, do you mind just giving us a quick introduction to you, who you are, what you do, and then we'll just jump in and ask you some questions and pick your.
Sure. I'm friends with Steve Johnson first, so that's what makes this interview so great. Been a professor at Columbia International in South Carolina for 28 years. I head up the youth ministry, family, and culture program. I have two kids, Rachel and Andrew, and son-in-law Chris, and a grandbaby Miles, who's 6 months old. And I wrote this book at the very start of the pandemic.
Wow, what a time to write a book! So that's a good segue into this, and that is what motivated you to write this book at this time, right there at the beginning of the pandemic.
Yeah, well, it was March the 5th, and I was speaking at Clemson University's FCA, Fellowship of Christian Athletes, which most people who go there are not athletes. It's kind of funny, but there were 700 students that night. And in the introduction, before me, the host said, please don't give anyone high fives or hugs. There's something coming to America called the coronavirus, and we don't know much about it, but we've been told to stay away from each other. So when you greet each other, pound each other with your elbow. And so I spoke. The next day we headed home. A week later, it was announced that this was a global pandemic. And if you were here, Steve, at our school at that point, you'll remember that everyone shut down. Everything, NBA, college basketball, stadiums were empty. Players were playing with no fans. Everything went virtual. Everything went Zoom. Churches and synagogues went Zoom. We talked about social distancing and mask wearing, and it became very political at points. And I felt like mid-June that there were a lot of noises in the culture, a lot of voices. And one of the ones that was absent for me was God's voice. I wasn't sensing God talking at all. In fact, I was letting other voices shout that voice. And so I just started journaling, and what became a book, it wasn't intended to be a book. It was just I'm a journal guy. And I was just journaling about, why does God feel so distant? And then I began to ponder my life where I have felt the absence of God or the silence of God. And much of that related to wanting to have a second child. And my wife and I had what was called secondary infertility. We could not get pregnant after our firstborn, and we got pregnant with Rachel quite easily. And the specialist in Cincinnati, Ohio said that you have secondary infertility. And we were like, what's that? He's like, well, it means that there's several camps. There's one camp that's infertile. They can't get pregnant at all. Well, you've obviously had one child. Well, you're in camp number 2. You've had secondary infertility, meaning you've had one, but you're having trouble having a second. And so for 15 years, we felt like God was very silent. And then all of a sudden we got pregnant, or my wife got pregnant, and we deemed it a miracle. And then only to find out later that our son would have Down syndrome, which felt like a real kind of kick to the gut. And so we had to process that, and frustration and disappointment and tears and anger. And what eventually in this book more for me was what kind of clicked for me were those 5 or 6 areas of our lives that we face every day that actually affect our ability to listen to the whisper of God. And those things would be fear and stress and anxiety, grief, loss, and the big one, unanswered prayer, and why does bad things happen to good people?
Yeah. I was just, as I was reading through your book, Dave, my experience has been that in our culture, especially today, we seem to run from silence. We're plugged in, we've got ear pods in the ears, the radio's on when we're in, the TV, we go shopping, there's music, even on the elevator, there's music. And we kind of run, it seems, this is my experience, is we seem to run from silence into busyness and noise. Is that your experience too? And if
Absolutely.
what's
Yeah,
the
I'm like you. I'm a doer. I'm a tasker. My Myers-Briggs is ENFJ, which means my E means I'm energized by being with people. But over the years, I kind of watched Jesus model of, in the day he was teaching, and at night he'd go to the Mount of Olives. And we know that he was, as a rabbi, a person of prayer. So he was always either teaching, or he was napping, or he was walking, or he was resting or sleeping or praying. And so, yes, most definitely. It was a good decade ago that I began to read the Desert Fathers, and I was like, well, that's nice. Those are that's good for them, but that's just not me. I'm just not a guy that can go sit on a pillar for 20 days and be quiet. And so embracing silence, embracing Sabbath. And even as a Jewish kid, I was taught Sabbath, but it wasn't life-giving. It was more legalism. It was more, don't do this and don't do that. In fact, you can remember when you're a kid going to the library and talking, and your parents going, shh, you're being quiet. And so even then you were being sent a message, you got to be quiet. And then I remember being punished at times and being sent to my room and being told to go to my room and just sit and be quiet. And I remember internalizing that as silence is punishment. So I had that paradigm growing up that being quiet is really sort of bad. And yet I think, one of my takes from scripture in my book is that that's where we meet God. We meet God in silence. And if we feel like God is silent, I used to hear preachers and teachers say, God meets us where we are. And I think that's true. But I think if we flip the script, what if we met God where God is? What if God is silent? And the only way to get to God is we got to enter into silence.
Yeah, and you're saying something really important, because those messages of silence is bad, it is a form of punishment, doesn't actually want us to sign up for silence.
Right.
And then the consequences of that is that we miss a lot of really what's important in life.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. I think I tell a story in the opening prologue about my last year in grad school. I had to have a clinical experience in either a psych unit or a hospital, and I chose University of Kentucky Medical Center because it was close to my school, and it was a month of intense 8 to 5 on the oncology floor. So you have 5-year-olds and 10-year-olds and 20s and 50s and 70s and 80s all dying of cancer, all struggling with cancer. And my first week, the attending nurse said to me, Mr. Olshine, don't go into room 402 or whatever room it was. Mr. Stone's in there and he is just really having a bad time. And she said, don't go in there if you want your life spared, because he's angry. Well, for me, that's like when high school told me not to go to the girls' dorm, right, at camp. So by 4 o'clock, I go knock on his door and I go in there, and he looks jaundiced. He looks old and ragged. And we sit down and I start to talk, and he doesn't say a word. And so I keep talking and talking, and finally he goes, "Shut the hell up." I said, "Okay." And he asked me to be quiet. And we sat there and he asked me to hold his hand. And as we held hands for what felt like eternity, was probably only 5 minutes, he began to cry. And he said, "My wife divorced me. My only son hates me. I'm a farmer from East Kentucky, and I'm going to die, and I'm scared to death." And he just sat there and just started to bawl, and I started to cry. And I learned so much in that clinical moment that, kind of like Job's friends, you don't need to talk. In fact, shut up, be quiet. And I think birthing in me that day was something new for me, was not just encountering people in crisis by being quiet, but that silence is very powerful. Silence is very sacred. It can be very holy, and we can really actually meet God there, meet people there.
Which makes sense now of the quote that you open chapter 2 with. You have from Chaim Potok, and that is, "I've begun to realize that you can listen to silence and learn from it. It is a quality and dimension all of its own." And I remember that particular book that Potok had that in there, and it's a rabbi who's raising his son in silence to really help him. The son experienced it as quite cruel, and dismissive, but it was intended for his best interest. So sure. That quote. And so, can you just name what really can we learn from silence? Some people might say, we're just fooling ourselves. We can't really learn anything from silence. What respond to that, and what can we learn from silence?
Well, that's a powerful question. I think that my first reaction is, I've got internal voices that I need to tame that seems to prevent me from being aware of people's needs, my own needs, and God, and what God's up to. And so I think that, like you're saying, you go to the dentist and there's music. You go to the grocery store, there's music. I've spent a lot of my time, even driving to school now. I've stopped listening to sports radio talk shows, and I've stopped Christian radio. So, and I'll sometimes just drive for my 22 minutes to school just in silence. So I think what it does is it deals with sort of our inner demons, our inner turmoil. And I think what silence does, it coughs that up. As my friend Rob says, if you're always busy and you're always tasking, you can't know what's below the waterline. You just can't, because you're too encumbered with tasking. And like you and I are in our week of grading projects, papers, and so hearing God becomes very difficult. And I think I know this more intellectually than I know this intuitive. But I know that God will not outshout my noises. I think God talks very quietly. When he talks to Elijah, it was in a still small voice. And I don't think most people have burning bush experiences where they have an audible voice through a bush. The normative experience is kind of an internal voice, a ticker tape, an impression, an idea, something that's usually smarter than what that you could have thought of, like, oh, that must have been God. So I think one of the things silence does is it deals with our inner world and helps us pay attention to other things besides us.
Yeah, it's interesting that idea that the chatter that's in our brain. Some current models in psychotherapy call that monkey brain. It's constantly shouting, etc. And we're trying to get to that quiet place. I'm fascinated, Dave, that in a book about the mystery of silence, that the issue of doubt comes up, faith and doubt.
Mm-hmm.
And I was reading that. I remember it was Paul Tillich, I guess, a Christian theologian years ago, said, "Dubito ergo sum." We doubt, therefore we are. That's a big part of being human, and that some people say that faith begins with doubt. How do you react to that? What do you see as the link between doubt and faith?
Yeah, I think my favorite passage is a man who comes to Jesus and says, "My child is sick," and the man says, I believe, help my unbelief." And I think that you see juxtaposed, you can have faith and doubt at the same time. And I think a perfect example is anybody's been on an airplane. You get on there and you've got about 90% confidence that you're going to make it. And you have 10%, holy crap, I don't know that we're going to get home. And so I think that feeling of faith and doubt is actually resonates. I quote our friend Larry Wagner, Dr. Larry Wagner, who says that a true faith isn't real faith without some doubts. And I resonate with that because I'm a, and I don't know if it's my Jewish upbringing, but I'm a naturally born skeptic. And I've always kind of lived in that, did God really speak to Moses? And so I think that as Austin Fisher says in his book on doubts, he says the only thing we can actually really be certain of is that we're not certain about anything. And so I think faith and doubt actually are a nice complement with each other. I think they make each other work.
Yeah, another question that I like, that I don't know anybody who has kind of like deep faith that doesn't have at times deep doubts. It just kind of, that's just a part of the depth of a human. It involves doubting and faith. I like the question that you respond to in the book, and that is that perhaps God's apparent silence permits us to declutter our lives. How does that work? That his silence allows us to declutter.
I don't know if I have an astute answer to that. I think I'm still in progress. And sometimes the process doesn't always look like progress. I think we're wired. We're wired to both talk and listen. I mean, we have 2 ears, but 1 mouth. We've heard that from our Jewish mothers, right? Growing up, time to listen, David, time to listen. And so I think that there's something profound about, and what I wrestled with in this book, and I hope I don't go a big tangent here, but the biggest thing I heard from the Christian community was God's in control. And I heard that over and over during the coronavirus. And I kept saying to people, what do you mean by that? And theologically, I think people were saying, well, God's on the throne and he's got this covered and blah, blah, blah. And I started thinking to the Genesis narrative that God actually made Adam and Eve in control of the planet. And does God have a control panel in front of him? I don't know if he does or doesn't. But what I do know is that he doesn't always push the control panel. And so I have extreme friends who what I would call fundamentalist Calvinist, who believe that every event is caused by God. Every scenario is created by God. I don't believe that. I'm not going to tell a parent whose child committed suicide that God caused that. That would be utterly cruel and not not true. And so even in the Christian faith, that the one thing that Christians do not like, and they will never admit this, they do not like mystery. They want everything neat and packaged, and they want the bow tied. And so when Andrew was born with Down syndrome, we cried for 30 days, if not 40, because we just couldn't wrap our mind. How could God allow us going 15 years without a baby? And now he's given us a baby that's got some imperfections. And we had to wrestle with mystery. And I started doing a word search, and silence is used like 50 times in the Bible, and mystery is used a bunch. And I started to connect the two, that we don't like mystery and we don't like silence, and yet God meets us in both of those worlds. And so some people will not like the ending of my wrap it up neatly and tightly. But what I say is that if you can have it all figured out, then your God's too small, and Jesus will jump out of the box. And I think the perfect example that Jesus uses mystery is the prodigal son. He's got the story of a young man who runs away from home. He spends all the father's money. He basically says, Dad, I wish you were dead. He goes, he hits rock bottom, comes to his senses, loses all the money, comes back home. The father embraces him. Well, people focus on that, but there's an elder brother. He's the good guy. Keeps his bed nice and tidy, and he's followed all the rules. And he's mad at the father for honoring the younger son. And the father says, listen, everything that's mine's yours. We're going to have a party. He was lost. He's found. I want you to come to the party. And Jesus freezes it, and you never know. Jesus uses a lot of parables, and he talks about the mystery of the kingdom. And some are hidden and some are exposed. And Deuteronomy 29, my favorite verse, is the things that are true are in his law, but the hidden things, the mystery things, belong to God. And so I believe God has a closet, so to speak, of tons of mysteries that only he understands, that only God understands, and that we will never understand it. And I think that we have got to get to a point where we can embrace mystery and ambiguity. And the things that we know. But how does a tree work? I don't know. I can't explain how a tree works. How does it grow? I don't really know. I guess I could try to explain it, but I'll never understand it. How does the universe work? How did God become 3 in 1? I don't know. So I think there's a lot of mystery. And I think the more we get to that comfortableness with mystery, we can meet silence.
Yeah. I really liked that section of your book. And that is, as a psychologist, I think when I thought about that, I thought a lot of people respond to mystery as though mystery is a threat.
Yeah.
And a threat to what? We could fill in the blank on that, all kinds of threats. And so even on a good day, individuals who see mystery as a threat just begrudgingly tolerate it at best. And you are encouraging people to embrace that mystery, but you go beyond that. You say celebrate it.
Yeah.
Celebrate the mystery. How do you go from not, people perceiving mystery as a threat, and I know that feeling, you know what I mean? To actually getting to the point where you can celebrate the mystery.
Well, let me ask you, Dr. Steve, a question. Is mystery a kind of a process for you as far as embracing it in your lifespan, in your faith development?
Yeah, and that process is not linear.
Yeah, right.
2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 3 steps back.
Yes.
And you just hope you're going in that direction where it is not seen as a threat. You can actually see the beauty and the opportunity and the resource of mystery.
Yeah, I think if you if you have kind of a Joel Osteen faith philosophy that every if I just speak it, name it, and claim it, every great thing's going to happen to me. Most people don't live there. I think most people live with a lot of ambiguity. They live with unanswered prayers, especially prayers for healing or guidance, seem to be the big things that throw people really off kilter. I like the analogy that Duffy Robbins uses of Tarzan. He's swinging from vine to vine, and he's just hoping that he doesn't miss one and go and fall and loses his leopard tights. I think we learn more through loss and failure, and begin to Job says, is God does God provide both blessing and adversity? And he said to his wife, both. He allows adversity and blessing. And I think the two go together. I mean, so you've got Ecclesiastes, there's a time to dance and there's a time to mourn. You can have the death of a good friend one day and the birth of your grandchild the next. And so life has those cycles. And I think those are meant to be embraced. And so I think that and to not resent it. And I think God ends up getting all the blame a lot of times unnecessarily because something doesn't go right. And that's what we were doing. I was blaming God that we couldn't get pregnant. It was like, God, you can snap your fingers on this. You can make this thing happen. And so, and Steve, a lot of us, I don't know about you, we don't like waiting and we don't like the process. And yet the process has a point to it. I was telling my son last night that life is not like the NFL draft where you've got a 5-minute ticker tape and God, you got to show up and boom, if you don't, or I'm going on a prayer retreat. I expect you to talk to me. And if you don't talk to me in three days, then you must not be real. And we come to these really crazy presuppositions about how God works and how he doesn't work. And so I think we can just slow the engine down, be still, and know that I'm God. That's, if I can slow myself enough, I can take a couple deep breaths. I started practicing this pause during the pandemic where I'd go out on my deck for about 20 minutes and just be silent. And many times I met God, and sometimes I didn't. Sometimes it was just me and coffee. But you just let your mind go wherever. And people would say, would you try to stop your mind? No, I just let go and see where it takes me.
Yeah. As I was reading through that book, I was reminded that one of the big problems that we have to deal with, I mean, those of us in mental health, arises out of the inability to handle frustration, right? We want instant gratification.
Yes.
And success in life, in whatever domain of life you're talking about, whether it's educational, professional, or spiritual, comes from dealing with the frustration, the impediments, the blocks, and all of that. And in fact, it was really great. I read the research recently that it is in striving to reach your goal, again, whatever those goals are, really good goals are, that in striving to reach the goal, the result is happiness and joy. It's not so much in the attainment of the goal, it is in the striving of the goal. So for me,
I like that.
In mystery, actually, if you just say that's a part of life, that's a part of what we strive for, and that there's going to be a really good outcome. If we can hang in there and not think that we are the creator and sustainer of what life should be like, right?
Yeah. Yep. Well, and I think I don't know if you resonate with this analogy, Steve, but Hollywood has figured out that Americans in general actually do like mystery, because the number one booksellers on every beach in the summer are mystery murders, novels, romantic novels that lead and have some kind of mystery to it. I think anyone who likes Star Wars or any trilogy, a succession of a part one, part two that leaves you hanging. And I know that some people will leave a movie theater and say, dang, I don't like that. I want to know, I want that tied up more tightly. But I think Hollywood has figured out that Americans actually like some mystery, leave some things hanging. And as a psychotherapist, the worst kind of advice to someone grieving who's lost someone is to try to give them a pat answer. They don't want that. They want a hug and a bouquet and maybe you bring them dessert in a week. They don't want a bunch of theological blah blah blah. It's not satisfying. And even after the person has tried to give their advice, they walk away going, I shouldn't have said anything.
Yeah. There are times when it's best to keep your mouth shut.
Yep.
Again, in the other part of your book, I love the quotes at the beginning of chapter sections.
That was some of the most fun parts, was coming up with those.
I bet it was, and I love the one at the beginning of part 3 where you quote Emily Dickinson. I know that he exists somewhere in silence.
Yes.
And for me, that was the book.
Yeah.
But learning how to see and experience that is the challenge.
Mm-hmm. It is.
Right. And so did you come up with discover ways that actually help you personally in seeing and experiencing God in the silence, experiencing the opportunity of the silence as an opportunity and not as a threat?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. I think I did a chapter called The Pods, which really was a very practical exercise for me to encourage folks to try who are uncomfortable with silence. The P is pause, where you take some deep breaths throughout the day. You intentionally slow it down. You slow your heart down. You take some deep kind of breaths from your diaphragm. Then the second step is outdoors. And I find that other than a litany and a symphony of my neighbors turning on their power mowers and their leaf blowers, I find that there's something rejuvenating about nature. I think we see that throughout scripture. These guys, they're outdoors people. Now I realize they're in a different culture, but there's something powerful about getting outdoors. The D stands for detox from social media. And so we don't do our phones during breakfast, lunch, or dinner at our house. I turn my phone off at 8 at night. But you'll go to a restaurant, you'll see a big family eating and no one's talking to each other. Everyone's on their phones. So I think the this little gadget here has really impacted our culture negatively. I mean, there's some positives to it because you can Google and get some quick things. But long story short, I think that getting outdoors, detoxing from social media, and then the last one is Henry Nouwen's concept of solitude. Embrace it. Get alone. Take a walk. Take a walk without your phone. Don't call anyone for 24 hours and see how that works. So I think those things, the pause, the outdoors, the detox, and the solitude has been a great help to me. I'm still learning. I don't think anyone lands like, got this thing figured out now. I think that's dangerous. I don't think anyone's there. I think we're all in process of that.
Yeah, that's good stuff. The social media thing is absolutely huge. I mean, the research that's trickled out. I was talking to a good friend of mine who's a researcher at the university up in actually in New Jersey. And I was saying to him, I said, are you seeing any signs in the young people who are really kind of addicted to the social media that kind of look like autism?
Mm.
Because absolutely, Steve, I just wrote a paper and it's going to be published
Wow.
on that topic. And he says, the concern is whether that's reversible or not.
Wow.
I'm like, yeah, just this incessant desire to run from silence, and be still and alone. Not in just, not like go sit on a rock and sit there for 15 years alone. I mean, we're not talking that stuff. That could be just as toxic, but just incorporating a more balanced life with that is really hurting them. Even the young ladies on social media that found that it contributes to suicide. So
Yeah.
really serious things. I mean, as a culture, we need to learn how to embrace silence much better and see the opportunity in doing that.
And we don't have to, I use the Sabbath model as a day to set aside where you just get some little pockets of quietness. You don't have to go the whole day. You don't have to torture yourself like, oh, I can't watch TV. No, don't think of it that way. Think of it as there's just some moments in the day that are designed for me to slow the engine down.
Yeah. Well, Martin Buber, the great writer, said he called those faith moments.
Yes, absolutely.
And don't we make it such a big thing like it's a huge mountain? No, these are moments. Enjoy those,
Absolutely.
Yeah, squeeze the good out of those. I've taken up so much of your time, but I do have one other question. One question and then something else at the end. What is the most important thing you want a reader of this book to take away from the experience of reading it?
I'll read you a quote from Tom Hanks at the very last chapter called Embracing Mystery When Certainty Fades. He said, quote, I must say that when I go to church, you can hear Tom Hanks saying this, and I do go to church, I ponder the mystery. I meditate on the why of, quote, why people are as they are, and, quote, why bad things happen to good people, and, quote, why good things happen to bad people. The mystery is what I think is almost the grand unifying theory of all mankind. So I end up saying that, and my doctorate's in family systems, so I use a lot of family systems in that chapter. But I talk about the goal of life, really, other than knowing God and loving people, is to learn to know who you are, to differentiate yourself, to figure out my voice, who I am, who I'm not. So I think introverts naturally like silence more than extroverts. So I think an introvert has a little bit more, couple steps ahead of us extroverts on that thing. I think for me, the grand idea of the book is mystery is not to be something that we have to overthink. We don't have to have everything figured out theologically or in life. Life is complex. And so I think there's some mystery, and embrace it. And the same with one of the ways to meet God is to be quiet. And so if you intersect the two, the mystery and the silence, and you put them together, you start to realize life can make some sense. I can embrace this, and I can embrace the things I understand, and I can embrace the things I do not understand and will never understand on this side of heaven. And I'm okay with that. And I think that Christians need to stop using pat answers, cliches for everything that happens, and stop thinking. I think that a lot of Christians are uncomfortable with certain categories. And mystery is one of them, and silence is the other. So I think that if I had to sum up the book in one sentence, is embrace mystery and embrace silence, and you'll meet God there.
Oh, try it. You'll like it.
Try it, you'll like it.
There you go.
Where's the meat? Where's the beef?
There you go. There you go. So thanks so much. Before we turn this off and go about grading papers.
Yes.
If somebody wants to get a hold of this book, how do they get a hold of it?
Well, the Mystery of Silence here, if they will go to the website, which is www.themysteryofsilence.com, it will click right in, and they just click on it, and they can order 1 or 5 or 10. And then the more they get, the cheaper it gets with my publisher. And eventually it will be an ebook, I believe this Friday, on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. And then my publisher is releasing it to Amazon and Barnes and Nobles in about 2 more months. So until then, themysteryofsilence.com is the simplest place to get it. And a lot of my friends on social media have been buying it and found it very easy.
Okay.
Yeah, theMysteryofsilence.com, all one word.
Well, thanks so much, Dave.
Thank you, Steve.
Encourage people to go out there and get it. And thanks for calling us all to a deep.
I appreciate the time with you, and God bless and Godspeed in grading of your final projects.
Okay.
Thank you.